What is up, YouTube? It is your boy, your poet, Kendrick Youngblood. I'm really excited about this analysis in particular. It's not quite an analysis of a spoken word poem, but more so a spoken word poem adapted to the page. Amanda Gorman is one of the most notable names that come to mind when you think of both spoken word and page poetry. She's excelled in both, quite frankly, and look, in this poem, you're gonna want to see this analysis, alright? Amanda Gorman, for those of you who don't know, was the former Youth Poet Laureate of the nation. She was invited by the Biden administration to recite her poem, The Hill We Climb, during Biden's inauguration. Went crazy viral. I mean, like we've never seen before from a poem, alright? And I reacted to it the day after she performed it. My video blew up. I got like 50,000 views in 2 days, which I've never had any growth like that before, ever, not even since. So it was no joke. Now, she has this masterclass on poetry, and in one of the lessons, she goes over her poem called Fury and Faith from her collection, Call Us What We Carry. I'm currently reading it right now. So far, Fury and Faith is the best poem, in my opinion, from the collection. I'm not done yet. With that being said, it definitely rivals The Hill We Climb. I'll say that much. It's fire, okay? Now, it's important to keep in mind that although this is a spoken word poem, we're not going to be analyzing her spoken word performance of the poem, but more so the page poetry itself. As we're watching her recitation of the poem during her masterclass lesson, you'll notice that she's enumerating on the screen different literary devices that she utilizes in the moment, but she doesn't address every single one. Chances are that's because she wants us to do our own homework and figure out what the others might be, right? She has a whole glossary from her masterclass of all the poetic devices, or at least a lot of them that's available to us as poets, right? So in this analysis, we're gonna pick apart every single thing, not just what she mentioned on the screen, but also the form, structure, the arrangement of the lines, the pacing. We're gonna be going over all of that, all right? So without further ado, let's get started.
This is Fury and Faith. You will be told this is not a problem, not your problem. You will be told now is not the time for change to begin, told that we cannot win. But the point of protest isn't winning. It's holding fast to the promise of freedom, even when fast victory is not promised. Meaning we cannot stand up to police when we cannot cease policing our own imagination, convincing our communities that this won't work when the work hasn't even begun, that this can wait when we've already waited out 1,000 suns. By now, we understand that white supremacy and the despair it demands are as destructive as any disease. So when you're told that your rage is reactionary, remind yourself that this rage is our right. It teaches us it is time to fight in the face of injustice. Not only is anger natural, but necessary, because it helps carry us to our destination. Our goal is never revenge, just restoration, not dominance, just dignity, not fear, just freedom, just justice. Whether we prevail is not determined by all the challenges that are present, but by all the change that is possible. And though we are unstoppable, if we ever feel we might fail, if we be fatigued and frail when our fire can no longer be fueled by fury, we will always be fortified by this faith found in the anthem, the vow, Black Lives Matter. No matter what, Black lives are worth living, worth defending, worth every struggle. We owe it to the fallen to fight, but we owe it to ourselves to never stay kneeling. But the day calls us to stand together. We envision a land that is liberated, not lawless. We create a future that is free, not flawless. Again and again, over and over, we will stride up every mountainside, magnanimous and modest. We will be protected and served by a force that is honored and honest. This is more than protest. It's a promise.
Y'all gotta give it to her. That poem goes hard. Oh my God. I never get tired of hearing that. Okay. This is not a reaction though. This is an analysis. So let's get started. All right. So first off, I just want to say when it comes to the structure of the poem, right? The form of the poem, you'll notice it's written in free verse, meaning there's no consistent rhyme scheme. There's no consistent meter, but there is rhyme. There's a lot of internal rhyme and even some end rhyme here and there. It's just sporadic. It's not patterned, if that makes sense. So it's rather unpredictable throughout the poem, which I tend to like. Another thing you'll notice is that she starts off the poem with the use of anaphora. Anaphora, if you do not know, is the repetition of a word or a phrase at the start of multiple lines, right? So she says, "You will be told this is not a problem, not your problem." And then she continues to say, "You will be told now is not the time for change to begin, told that we cannot win." So you have the "you will be told, you will be told." This rhetorical device does a couple of things. For one, anaphora will add emphasis to whatever phrase you're using for the simple fact that you're repeating it, but also it creates a sense of unity in the message you're conveying. You'll notice after she says "you will be told this is not a problem," she says "not your problem," and she italicizes your. Italics, just like repetition, will add emphasis to the particular word, but this was done particularly, in my opinion, to show that she was making a correction to what was previously stated. When she previously said "not a problem," she's now saying "not your problem." She's adding specificity to where there was once vagueness. Bars. Okay, but for real though, that's exactly what's happening. Okay, moving on. We notice that there's rhyme where she says "for change to begin, told that we cannot win." Now in the second stanza, Amanda makes light use of a poetic device called alliteration. Alliteration is where you repeat the same or similar sound at the start of consecutive words in a line or multiple lines, all right? In this case, it would be the P sound, but the point of protest isn't winning. It's holding fast to the promise of freedom. There's a bit of alliteration for the F sound too, holding fast to the promise of freedom, okay? Now, alliteration often contributes a musical element to whatever poem you're conveying, just like rhyme does. So even though we don't have literal instruments playing in the background as we're reciting our poetry, we can add music to it based on how we play with sound. All right, so just like rhyme, alliteration provides that musical element where you wouldn't otherwise have it when all your instruments are words, okay? We also have a bit of consonants, right? Consonants would be the repetitive use of a consonant sound in a line, phrase, or stanza, okay? So here we have the repetition of the T sound, but the point of protest isn't winning. Y'all see that? So there's like this constant use of the T sound, that would be consonants as well. If we move on to the third line, you'll notice she says, "Meanwhile, we cannot stand up to police if we cannot cease policing our imagination." For starters, we have anaphora, which again is the repetition of a word or a phrase at the start of consecutive lines, right? So we cannot, but then also there's a bit of wordplay in the sense that there's quasi repetition of the word police, right? First, police is used as a noun and then it's next used as a verb, you know? So we cannot stand up to police if we cannot cease policing our imagination.
I completely forgot to mention that Amanda used irony here. Black folks have historically been heavily policed in America, right? Yet she makes a point to say that we black folks are doing the exact same thing that we complain about, but to ourselves, to our imagination specifically, right? So she's forcing us to acknowledge the hypocrisy there in the hopes that we make a change.
Moving on from there, she utilizes alliteration once again, convincing our communities that this isn't work, when the work hasn't even begun, that this can wait when we've already waited out 1,000 suns. So you have the alliteration of the C sound, you have alliteration of the W sound, like a lot of W sounds actually. Now in the phrase where she says we've already waited out 1,000 suns, she's making use of hyperbole, aka exaggerative speech, okay? We haven't really been waiting out 1,000 suns or 1,000 years as what she's really trying to imply. However, it must have felt that way, which is why she used that verbiage. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that by saying 1,000 suns as opposed to 1,000 years, she creates a rhyme with begun, when the work hasn't even begun, that this can wait, when we've already waited out 1,000 suns, right? Saying 1,000 years wouldn't have had that musical element to it, so keep that in mind as well. She then goes on to say, by now we understand that white supremacy and the disparate demands are as destructive as any disease. There we have a lot of alliteration. Disparate demands are as destructive as any disease. There you have the D sound being repeated at the start of multiple words. And then if we move on to the next stanza, we have a bit of alliteration there as well. So when you're told that your rage is reactionary, remind yourself that rage is our right. You have the repetition of the R sound. Look, alliteration is a tool that Amanda will use and use and use and use and use in a lot of her poems. You can check The Hill We Climb, you'll see the exact same thing. However, it never comes across as forced or overdone. All right, for the simple fact that she's not willing to sacrifice the message for the sake of just getting that poetic device in there. You can tell she put it in there because it really fit, not just because she was trying to sound super poetic. All right, so keep that in mind. Anyway, so moving on from there, at the end of that stanza, she says, not only is anger natural, but necessary. We have alliteration of the end sound, and then she goes on to say, because it helps carry us to our destination. Necessary and carry provides that internal rhyme because it wasn't at the end of the lines where the rhyme happened. But notice this, there was some end rhyme between the last line of this stanza and the first line of the next stanza. Watch, because it helps carry us to our destination. Our goal is never revenge, just restoration. And in having those two lines rhyme, she forces you to read those separated lines in conjunction with one another as opposed to independently of one another. And when you read those two together, you'll notice it gives one whole message. So even though those two lines are separated between stanzas, having them rhyme regardless allows the reader to read them in unison. All right, so I thought that was really cool. I mean, this quatrain in particular is really stacked. You'll see what I mean in a second. And by quatrain, I mean a 4-line stanza. Okay, so not only is there the rhyme between restoration and destination of the previous stanza, you'll also notice that there's alliteration in every single line, right? Never revenge, just restoration. Not dominance, just dignity. Not fear, just freedom. Just justice, right? You have alliteration of the R sound, the D sound, the F sound, the J sound, but that's not all. We also have antithesis going on. The first 3 lines of the quatrain, you have polar opposites being juxtaposed, all right? And that's what antithesis is. It's just where you position 2 contrasting ideas next to each other. All right, so revenge is pretty much the opposite of restoration. Dominance is the opposite of dignity. Fear is the opposite of freedom. But let's take a closer look at the 4th line. You'll notice a bit of wordplay there for the simple fact that the word just is injustice. So when she repeats just, justice, you know, there's a bit of repetition there, kind of like with the police policing wordplay that happened earlier in the poem. But furthermore, you'll notice just justice is actually a double entendre, meaning that it's one phrase that has 2 different meanings. Just justice can mean only justice or simply justice, right? But it can also mean good justice or moral justice. Just can mean only, but it can also mean moral. So there's a double entendre happening there, which again simply means one word or phrase having 2 different meanings. Moving on from there, we have a bit of anaphora. Whether we prevail is not determined by all the challenges that are present, but by all the change that is possible. So you have the repetition of by all the, but also we have a duplication of line structure. Notice how you have challenges that are present, change that is possible. Notice how the line structure is similar there. You have the ch and j sound, and then the p sound. You have the ch and j sound and the p sound, right? Challenges that are present, change that is possible. Next up, we have the rhyme between possible and unstoppable. Just like with the destination restoration, you'll see how having possible and unstoppable rhyme, even though they're between 2 stanzas, forces the readers to read those 2 lines as if they should go together. She says, if we ever feel we might fail, if we be fatigued and frail, when our fire can no longer be fueled by fury. That is a lot of F sounds going on there, right? We will always be fortified by this faith found in the anthem, the vow. A lot of F sounds, y'all seeing that? And then she goes on to say, Black lives matter no matter what. Black lives are worth living. So there we have the anaphora for Black lives, the repetition of that phrase at the start of the lines. But then we have a bit of, I wouldn't really call it wordplay. I don't exactly know what to call this, but you'll see how the word matter is used to affirm Black lives and immediately after is used to negate any possible exception to the affirmation. The same word is being used to both promote an ideal and detract from opposing sentiments. I thought that was pretty cool in and of itself. And then you have some more anaphora going on. Worth defending, worth every struggle. And then there's even more. We owe it to the fallen to fight, but we owe it to ourselves to never stay kneeling. So we have the we owe. We owe it to ourselves to never stay kneeling when the day calls us to stand. Kneeling has become an act of protest ever since Colin Kaepernick showcased it in the NFL. Amanda appears to be saying that there's a time for that kind of protest, sure enough, but that is not the only form we should be utilizing. We shouldn't only kneel in opposition to what we don't believe in, but we should also stand for what we do believe in, right? And I like the subtle reference she made to that act of protest in and of itself. Like, there's a time and place for that, but not just for that. You feel me? Moving on from there, we have even more alliteration. I'm telling you, Amanda she be using this. Together, we envision a land that is liberated, not lawless. So that's alliteration of the L sound. We create a future that is free and not flawless. Alliteration of the F sound. Again and again, over and over. Quite literally, she's using alliteration again and again, over and over. I see what she did there, right? We will stride up every mountainside, magnanimous and modest. So that's alliteration of the M sound, okay? But there's also antithesis going on between magnanimous and modest. Those are two opposite ideas just being shoved up against each other. We will be protected and served by a force that is honored and honest, okay? So honored and honest, alliteration of the H sound.
Okay, I don't know what I was thinking. Sorry about that. That is not alliteration of the H sound. H is literally silent and honored and honest. It's alliteration of the O sound. My bad.
By a force that is honored and honest, this is more than a protest. So force and more, that's some internal rhyme there. It's a promise. Now, here's one thing I want to point out. You will notice, hopefully you will notice, that the greatest endings of poems often reiterate a thought or sentiment that was expressed earlier in the poem, okay? Making the poem circle back to an idea of protest and promise that was mentioned at the start of the poem gives the poem a sense of completion. So again, if you forgot, promise and protest were two ideas that were mentioned at the very start of the poem. Remember, she said in the second stanza, but the point of protest isn't winning. It's holding fast to the promise of freedom even when fast victory is not promised. All right? So she circles back to that very idea, just wraps up the poem in a really nice bow. Doing that also conveys to the reader that she wasn't being scatterbrained in the point she was addressing. There was a very clear destination from the start. All right? So I highly advise that you use that tactic of structuring your poem in your poetry. Have something like an idea or concept or philosophy brought up at the start of the poem and return to that at the end. All right. You'll also notice that the words she chose to rhyme and not rhyme coincide with what she prioritizes between protest and promise. Look over here. She rhymes modest with honest, sure enough. Now, protest, which comes after honest, does not rhyme vocally or audibly. Right? It's an I rhyme. It looks like it rhymes. If you look at it, honest looks like it would rhyme with protest. They both have the EST at the end. So it's an I rhyme, but it's not a true rhyme. However, promise does in fact rhyme with honest, even though it doesn't quite look like honest. So it's almost as if when she had the line, this is more than a protest, she was giving a false promise of a rhyme occurring. That's what an I rhyme really is. It's a false promise. You would look at that if you weren't an English speaker and be like, yeah, those two words probably rhyme, but they really don't. It's a trick. It's a lie, right? It's a false promise of sorts. But then sure enough, she ends it with, it's a promise, which sure enough does rhyme with honest. So it's kind of like she held out on us temporarily and was like, nah, never mind. I'm not going to lie to y'all like that. You feel me? So I thought that was really, really cool. And honestly, I think that's a beautiful way to end the poem. Right? You have the protest word, which is an I rhyme, which is almost like an incomplete promise of a rhyme showing up. But then it's a promise is actually the promise being fulfilled of a rhyme that was supposed to happen. You know what I mean? And it's really cool how she's forcing the reader to view the BLM movement as more than a protest, but a promise in how she structured the rhymes. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's really mind blowing how she did that. And I'm just going to end the analysis there. So I really hope you all enjoyed. I definitely did, and I plan to do more analyses like this in the future. I plan to do a review of Call Us What We Carry in the future, and I plan to do a review of her Masterclass. Subscribe so you'll know when it's up. Other than that, check out the poems I've dropped on the channel lately. They go pretty hard. They didn't get any views, so you might think they don't go hard, but trust me, they go hard. All right, so check those out. I'd really appreciate it. And with that, I'm out. Deuces.